Hello guys and gals, me Mutahar, and it's a pretty bad day for gaming. Ladies and gentlemen, for anybody that hasn't been following, you might have come across this one crazy mention where basically the US Copyright Office literally said that they would not grant new exemptions for video game preservation. Now, I made plenty of videos talking about emulation and video game preservation because I'm somebody that enjoys playing video games, right? I play a lot of video games, and I play a lot of older video games these days. Recently, I've been playing through something known as Splinter Cell Pandora Tomorrow, okay? Now, here's the fun fact about Splinter Cell Pandora Tomorrow. If you decide to go to Ubisoft store right now, okay, right now you wanted to go get it. That means if you search up Splinter Cell, you can buy the original game, you can buy the third game, Chaos Theory, you can buy Double Agent, the Dog Cheeks one for PC, Conviction, which surprisingly is the only one not on sale today, and then Splinter Cell Blacklist. But nowhere in this list do you see Splinter Cell Pandora Tomorrow. So I decided, oh shit, let me check out Steam. Not there either. In fact, it's not even on the actual Xbox store. So realistically in this scenario, okay, one could go online on the internet and download it without Ubisoft's permission and blessing, which technically would be illegal. Or if you happen to own the physical copy like I do, from the days of the original Xbox, yeah, sure, you can play the game at that point. Now, I find it really weird when an entire game isn't available at all. All of a sudden, like 20% of this franchise is just gone out. It's not available, whether it be for licensing reasons or whatever, okay? If you happen to own an Xbox Series X, you can put this disc into your Xbox and just download a version of the emulator from Microsoft, but you just can't buy the game. So it's a little weird how certain things are just blocked off for no real fucking reason. Now, ladies and gentlemen, one of the things that I came across, and I absolutely 100% unequivocally support, is the Stop Killing Games project. Months ago, we actually had even talked to Ross from Accursed Farms, and I had personally really believed in his campaign, and I still do very much. I don't know why I worded it that way. But Stop Killing Games is an amazing initiative where, again, it's a petition initiative, whatever, where video games, what we're trying to do, what in this community want to get done is to make sure video games don't just die for a multiple reasons, okay? A lot of video games might be tied to an online only server, right? Meaning that they have a complete single player functionality with games like The Crew. You know, a game where you can play it online or you can play through like 95% of the content literally by yourself with other AI in the game. Now, the only reason it's offline is because it needs to connect to a fucking server, when realistically, Ubisoft could decide to patch the game for offline and just let you play an older game that you bought, instead of going out and buying The Crew 2 or The Crew Motorsport, or Motorfest, sorry, which easily, years down the road, they could just take down anyways. So these are one of those things that people are fighting against, and the other aspect of it is digital rights management that prevents you from playing video games down the road. Now, recently, Call of Duty Black Ops 6 came out, which, yours included. I love that game's campaign. And here's the thing about it. It requires you to be connected to Activision or Microsoft servers to basically be playing it. Now, there's literal footage you can watch of people getting disconnected from the game's single-player campaign. Literally a campaign that is locally running on your computer. The AI is locally fucking processed. Everything is locally run. But because the game inherently requires you to connect to an internet service for no real goddamn reason, if you get your internet connection interrupted, and it happens from time to time, all of a sudden you get disconnected from a single player experience and get booted right out to the main fucking lobby. Now, in what world does that make any sense? It doesn't. And honestly, if you defend any company wanting to do that, then you're a cuck, okay? Simple as that. No game company should really be locking off or including DRM. That doesn't really mean anything for video games. Like, I would understand if a video game is an MMO or a completely multiplayer experience, meaning that in order to play the basic functionality of the game, you need to be playing with other people. I can kind of understand it. But for a single player game, doesn't make any sense whatsoever. And it even goes out to like physical copies of games. Like, for instance, if you buy Starfield, and I know I have my issues with the game, but if you buy a physical copy for the Xbox, it doesn't even contain the whole game, all right? Which is like, why would you even release a copy of the game which people buy most people who just want to have no downloads to begin with, or very little downloads, you're going to release them a physical version of a game that doesn't even have the whole goddamn game on it. It just makes no sense in these entire scenarios. So while Ross's campaign is great, this one comes from the Video Game History Foundation. And unfortunately, over the course of, I want to say, the weekend, the US Copyright Office literally said they would not grant new exemptions in support of video game preservation. So according to the actual, judgment that the US Copyright Office put down, I'm going to read an exception of it just to bring up what is effectively being talked about. So DVD-CCA and AACS-LA and Joint Creators I opposed removing the single user limitation. They argued if a preservation institution were to allow multiple simultaneous uses of a preserved program, users' conduct would not be fair use and would cause market harm. So this is not necessarily in relation to DRM or preservation directly. This is an actual argument made towards hosting like a digital library for video games, right? So imagine if your video game is super duper old, having like a digital archive where people can connect to and access and play really old video games that aren't really being sold anymore. This is actually in opposition to that. So going down further, they said that apparently opposing removes the premises limitation. They contended that there would be a significant risk that preserved video games would be used for recreational purposes. Oh yeah? You mean like people watch movies for fun, but they're preserved pretty well? Like people listen to music for fun? That's preserved pretty well, but not video games. No, video games would be used for entertainment. Really? You tell me something? Really? Somebody's gonna play elevator action on the NES for some fucking fun? Of course they will. They further argue that the expanded exemption would give preservation institutions too much discretion regarding how they provide remote users access to preserved works, and that it did not contain appropriately tailored restrictions to ensure that uses would be limited to teaching, research, and scholarship uses. So you might be like, Muda, who's researching or teaching from video games? Imagine you were a game design teacher, right? And you wanted to dig up a copy of an older video game to show people like what video games of this specific era did. That might be important. When it comes to research, imagine being like a researcher and looking up like why video games like Chaos Theory were super duper successful, right? I'm playing a video game, Chaos Theory, that is effectively almost 20 years old. It's between 18 to 20 years old. I think the release date was like 2005. So 19 years of age, or whatever it is. It is an old game, okay? It is old enough for me to legally have a beer with. Now in this situation, all right, I'm playing Chaos Theory because if you blow it up today, with a few fan fixes, by the way, no help from Ubisoft, it is an amazing stealth action experience that I'm playing for the story. And again, it is an actual stealth action experience that I haven't seen beaten personally, even by games released as of recently as 2024. It was really a time when Ubisoft and Ubisoft Montreal truly gave a fuck about the video games they made. It was a game that visually blew the socks off of many video games from 2005, despite literally releasing on, at the time, last generation hardware, right? Xbox 360 was already coming out around that time. It was a video game that showed amazing usage of light and dark, amazing usage of shadows, amazing ambiance, actually really brilliant artificial intelligence for the time, and a whole myriad of non-linear gameplay that you can use to effectively be one of the craziest stealth operators in the area, right? And that's an old-ass video game. There's plenty of old RPGs people play, right? And again, if you're somebody that is researching, you might want to research and understand why certain games were effectively successful. But to go further, they believe that removing the premise limitations would also adversely affect the existing market for older video games. So this is an amazing line, by the way, too. Now there is an older video game market. Now, if you look at things like eBay, for instance, and this is probably the worst end of it, usually you'll find people that sell Chrono Trigger, authentic, tested, free shipping, $200, okay? Now, this guy is selling it for $25 plus $15 shipping, and he's like, make sure to read the description. The description says it's not even authentic. This man is selling an inauthentic version of the game, all right, which is no better than piracy or downloading a fucking ROM, all right? This is the current market, okay? It's either you pay up the ass for authentic goods, or you literally pay for, Jim Bob put together a cartridge with a ROM plastered on it, right? And again, if you go to some markets, right, you can buy games like Splinter Cell Pandora tomorrow for like $5, $14. Again, you know, it can either be slightly used, okay? Maybe the cartridge was chewed on by somebody's dog for a little bit, or it could be brand spanking new for a brand spanking new price. It is just an insane used games market, okay? And it's one of the reasons why, thank God, ROMs and emulators exist, okay? And the PC market exists inadvertently, especially DRM-free stores like GOG, where you don't have to get absolutely ass-fucked financially when it comes to people reselling you retro video games. Now, when it comes to, you know, video game publishers, you know, selling older video games, that's a pretty big market in of itself. Remasters, re-releases. I mean, you know, you got Sony here selling a really retro game by the name of Horizon Zero Dawn for full price, by the way. How much of it is actually expanded and enhanced? Well, I guess I'll leave Digital Foundry to answer that question. But sometimes you come across really shit versions of software, like Splinter Cell Trilogy. Now, the reason why I own Pandora Tomorrow on the actual original Xbox is because this is the best way to play the game conveniently running on an actual Xbox Series X. See, when a game publisher like Ubisoft gets together and digs up their old code bases and resells you this shit for like $60, sometimes this is actually the worst way to play the game. Now, the original Splinter Cell, Pandora Tomorrow, and, you know, honestly, I'll even say Chaos Theory is not that crazy here. The entire online versions of these games have been removed, so even if you could find a way to play with other people, which there are, inaccessible, okay? You've already had content removed. The actual performance for Pandora Tomorrow is so bad that I would rather have sex with a wood chipper than play this version of the game. And don't take my word for it, there's a pretty good reviewer on the internet known as Critical Nobody that made an entire video reviewing these games. And when it came to playing Pandora Tomorrow, it wasn't ever advised that you should play this version of the game. If you could find an old copy or find a PC version of the game, which happens to be floating out there with easily accessible fixes, play that fucking shit instead.
Bit of a PSA on Pandora Tomorrow. So when going back and playing these games again, I wanted to do so in the most convenient way possible, and in the case of Pandora Tomorrow, I figured that was the HD version that's available on PS3. It upscales the game to a higher resolution, but it also incorporates quick saves, which were not originally there. Well, that sounds like the best version to me, so I plopped down $15, played through the whole thing, and don't buy this version. This port seems to be very poorly optimized, as I experienced this consistent hitching that wasn't there in the original release. Hitches when just moving through the environment, hitches when firing my gun, and most notably, hitches in between lines of dialogue as if the game is struggling to load the next sentence.
So even the original market that the US Copyright Office wants to protect so much isn't even doing the best that they can to make sure their re-releases play the best, okay? Sometimes you really just need an original copy of the game to play it. Lest I remind the audience of the Grand Theft Auto Definitive Edition, would you rather play through that slop or somehow find the original copies of the game, which are still floating around out there, and play those instead, where the bugs are not as severe, where the original soundtrack is present, the art style isn't ass fucked to begin with? There's a lot of reasons why people want preservation in old games to exist, okay? It's because some people just want to play a game in the actual time period it released, to the best of its ability. So again, they go down further and say the register concludes the proponents did not show that removing the single user limitation for preserved computer programs or permitting off-premises access to video games are likely to be non-infringing. She also notes the greater risk of market harm with removing the video game exemptions premise limitation given the market for legacy video games. Again, like I said, there is a market for legacy video games out there. But not all video games that are re-released for the audience usually are re-released in the best capable way. May I remind the audience of the original Silent Hill 2 and 3 HD collection? I mean, shit, the water looked like actual ass sludge in that, okay? I mean, they had Comic Sans, you know, as text. It was a bad release. But again, she recommends clarifying the single copy restriction language to reflect the preservation institutions can allow a copy of a computer program to be accessed by as many individuals as there are circumvented copies legally owned. This clarifying text will address the perceived ambiguity in the current exception, while maintaining the single user limitation intended purpose to minimize the risk of substitutional uses of preserved computer programs. So in this situation, obviously, the more you look down the response from the actual Video Game Historical Foundation, they ended up basically saying, look, under the current anti-circumvention rules of Section 1201 of the DMCA, libraries and archives are unable to break copy protections on games in order to make them remotely accessible to researchers, right? So even original games that have complete DMCA, or not DMCA, but like copyright protections that prevent access to those video games, they exist. So this whole fight for 3 years that they've been working on pretty much stems from them even bringing up a research paper that says 87% of video games released in the United States before the year 2010 remain out of print. And this is a pretty massive research that they've done onto it, and you can read it for yourself if you really want to, and I highly recommend you do. But one of the actual key points from this on page 15 also showed me another reason for why video game reissues have problems. Resolving technical issues does not guarantee a game can be reissued. So even if you can get a game emulated up to modern hardware, where it plays really well, that's not the point. Sometimes it could literally be that the games are so old and they're done in a collaborative effort, where in one instance, X-Men, the arcade game from 1992, which developed by Konami, was not reissued until 2010 because of Konami's licensing agreement with X-Men's rights holder, Marvel. The licensing agreement, which gave Konami the limited ability to distribute the game in arcades, likely expired soon after the original game's release. So again, these licenses are only done because Konami just wants to make the game right now and distribute it, and they don't really care about the effort required to keep it afterwards. Sometimes it might just be too expensive to keep a game active when it's long dead, and that's why they just end up going into the ether. It's probably one of the reasons why games like Pandora Tomorrow aren't accessible in some way on the Ubisoft store, because there's probably some licensing issue that Ubisoft doesn't want to hold out. Maybe that's a reason why games like Driver San Francisco aren't fucking available. But to go back to this point, in a case like this, the continual upkeep and cost of licensing agreements may deter publishers from keeping their games available over longer periods of times. As a result, if a player or researcher wants to access X-Men the arcade game, the only authorized ways to play it are already purchasing a digitally distributed copy of the game on a legacy console that somehow still works, to playing the game on vintage arcade hardware that cannot be easily transported, or by purchasing a new licensed replica arcade cabinet at an exorbitant price of $749. Or the proper halal way, in my opinion, is to just emulate a game that neither Konami or Marvel are really profiting off of in any way. And look, at the end of the day, when you look at things like 87% gone, one of the cliff notes about this pretty much discusses what they mean. 87% of games, classic ones, are not in release and are considered critically endangered. And by their definition, what critically endangered effectively means is something like this. Imagine the only way to watch Titanic was to use a used VHS and maintain your own vintage equipment that you could still watch. But what if no library, not even the Library of Congress, could do any better? So while they could keep and digitize the VHS of Titanic, meaning that you could watch it easily, especially down the road, this is kind of what is asked for, especially older video games, right? Like imagine if you could have some form of a website where you could play something like the Magnavox Odyssey, an era of consoles where in order to actually get graphical output, you needed to tape shit onto your TV. Now, the only way to really play these kind of games, if you want right now, is to find yourself an old Magnavox Odyssey, or try emulating it online, all right, with maybe some software overlays yourself. So yeah, in this regard, look, having some level of actual preservation is very important, especially for older games where the hardware is so rapidly aging and dying out. Now, you could pay exorbitant amounts to purchase classic hardware, maybe FPGA solutions, but I don't think that anybody should really be against some form of a digital library that allows you to at least partake in playing these older video games, especially games that are not touched by a lot of these publishers at all. I think the only reason the video game industry is so horny and against this is, personally, I think a lot of these older companies or a lot of these big publishers, especially like Nintendo, want to find a way to make subscription services to play these older games, which they kind of have with Nintendo Switch Online, but ultimately that's still not ownership and that's still not true preservation. I really feel like the only way these games are properly preserved is when there are ROM files that exist and there are functional emulators that allow anybody of any age to play these games in any capacity, right? And that's why I'm such a big supporter of preservation and emulation. I understand that piracy is a real problem, and I've always been against that. And I think there shouldn't really be any reason that you're pirating a video game that is still actively sold. If you're especially, like, you are directly harming the industry at that point, right? You're taking away a legitimate sale. But when it comes to playing older video games that these companies don't really care about, don't want to bring back, I don't understand why the industry is so hard against it when they're not doing anything with their intellectual property. It's like if tomorrow Sony came out of nowhere and just decided to shut down the Bloodborne like Shat PS4 emulator, right? Even though that's a general emulator, it's not just for Shat or Bloodborne. Imagine if Sony shut it down, but they didn't even bother releasing a version of Bloodborne for the PC or doing anything. It's like getting involved with trying to stop video game history from being dead and still not providing a conclusive way to actually enjoy these games down the road. I just don't understand the way the industry goes sometimes. And while I can understand it from like a business perspective and, protecting your IP, at the end, I am a gamer that has decades of gaming history and I've seen tons of video games and I've played tons of video games. And as somebody that has recently been playing video games that are like 15 to 20 years old and loving them, I want more gamers to actually experience that. And gaming publishers don't care about it. But if it means that, gamers that are modding these games so that they're even functional, like Splinter Cell, to this day, and, people that are building emulators so people can play older games from the PS2 era to this day, I'll be honest, ethically, I support that shit way more. But yeah, ladies and gentlemen, this is me, Mutahar, and kind of a bad day for gaming preservation, I would say, especially for, more specifically, video game preservation access. Ladies and gentlemen, if you like what you saw, please like, comment, and subscribe. Dislike or dislike it, I am out.